Well, I think we'll get the meeting started. Welcome everyone to Greening USA's perhaps our first Wednesday Green Bag Lunch. We had a little trouble with the schedule and the room, so we settled on doing it on Wednesday. April is packed with a lot of activities, so it became difficult to try to find a Friday, the second Friday particularly, that we like to use, that the room was free. So we appreciate you showing up on Wednesday. Just a couple of announcements. One of the big events that got in the way of the second Friday is the Energy Symposium that Rhea Jazer organizes. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. If you haven't registered yet, you might want to take a look at that. There's a lot of other activities listed on Greening USA's newsletter. If you don't get it, there's probably a sign-up list out on the table there if you want to get your own copy. We like to start by going around the room and just have everybody introduce themselves, and maybe just really quickly, because we want to turn it over to our speaker today. And I just want to remind everybody that we are broadcasting live with a GoToMeeting. I think we have 9 people said that they were going to log in, so that's a good sign. But the microphones are live. I believe the microphone, I don't see any lights on it, but in the center, that's hanging in the center of the room, is supposed to be live. So you might want to be careful what you say. I don't know. Are we using the video camera? We're not using the video camera today, so I guess you don't have to worry about that today. So before I introduce our speaker, Sam Gordon, why don't we start going around the room over here and just go quick?
Sure. Hi, my name is Mike Roach. I'm with RAR Energy Group, and we are a commercial solar developer working with the Town of DeWitt on the landfill solar project.
Dave Ashley, I'm a Greening USA member and emeritus partner, Ashley McGraw Architects.
I'm Bob Haley, architect and planner, and committed to, as much as I can, to sustainable planning futures for everyone.
Barry Lenz, I'm a member of Greening USA, Moving People Transportation Coalition, and a bunch of other things, especially focused on the I-81 issue and regional transportation system that moves people and not cars.
Richard Zone Nichols, Energy Solutions, a local residential small commercial solar installer.
Sam Doubleday, like Mr. Roach, I'm a solar developer and live in the town next to the Town of DeWitt.
I'm Sue Savion. I live in DeWitt. I have been chair of Green Sanctuary Social Justice Committee at May Memorial and still a member of that group.
I'm Paul I. Holford, Concerned Citizens.
So I also member of that Greening USA.
Karen Whitney, DeWitt Town Board member.
Connie Grace, I am an architect and a representative from Sustainable Scales, looking to see what we can learn. Carol Stokes-Colley, I'm a trustee on the Village Board, Stevie Atlas, and also a member of Sustainable Scales.
I'm Caitlin Creasel. I'm a financial advisor with Hansen's Advisory Services, and our firm focuses on socially responsible investing.
Carol Biesmeyer, I'm a member of Greening USA and also Habitat Gardening in Central New York.
Mary Kuhn, I'm a resident of DeWitt and a candidate for county legislature, the 7th district, and what opted me into that race was supporting the community.
We'll go in the back.
Peter Alexander, sat on the board of Greening USA a number of years ago. Currently a substitute teacher, Syracuse City School District. I own my own hypnosis clinic, and I just got hired at Pyramid Brokerage. So I saw it, which is in DeWitt, and I saw this, and I said,
Welcome. Good to see you again, Peter.
Peter Ward, active with Climate Change Awareness and Action.
Bob Chrysler, Greening USA member.
Christine Manchester to the Town of DeWitt, planning and zoning. Stephanie Grushy, the Town of DeWitt County Coding and Environmental Planner.
And over here is,
Oh, Diane Brownway, I'm president of City USA, and thank you all for taking time to come. As John mentioned, if you don't receive our newsletter, how many people don't receive our newsletter? You don't want to identify yourself, I don't. So there is, it's absolutely free, we don't share our mailing list, it's half the activities related to sustainability over at New York, sign up sheet outside. Also, we are 100% volunteers, none of us get a penny for what we do. And if you find it in your hearts to become a member, thank you for the people who are members. Bob, I know they own them. They're original charter members. That money goes for helping us with our very minimal expenses. So please, there are membership forms out there. Please see about it. And we thank the Service Center of Excellence for letting us use the facility.
thanks for saying that, Diane. I would have forgotten about thanking them today, but yes, we've been welcome here for quite some time. But it sounds like we appreciate everybody coming today. It seems like we have the honor roll of sustainability in Central New York right here in this room. So thank you. And for our speaker today, we have Sam Gordon. And I wasn't quite sure which way to introduce him, but I think I'm going to start at the end and go to his current position. Sam holds master's degrees in landscape architecture and environmental and community land use planning from SUNY ESF right here in Syracuse. He has served as a regional coordinator for NYSERDA's EDGE program. He coordinated the Central New York Energy Challenge team initiative. In 2011, actually it was in 2012 at the Greening USA's annual meeting, Greening USA recognized Sam as a sustainability leader with our sustainability award in the planning and resource management field. All of those activities that Sam undertook were while he was working as the senior planner at the Regional Planning Board from 2010 to 2014. And in that role, he was a coordinator for the Climate Change Innovation Program for the Central New York area. A total of 18 years experience in planning and sustainability. Sam became the planning director, the director of planning at the Town of DeWitt in 2014, something like that. And in that role, he manages the development process, the implementation of the town's comprehensive plan, all the sustainability initiatives, the development of the DeWitt Sustainability Plan, the Moving DeWitt Initiative, and the Elevating Erie Initiative. And with all these things going on, we thought, well, we should have Sam come back here and tell us an update on all this stuff, because the Town of DeWitt is certainly doing a lot of good things. So without further ado, I'll give you Sam Gordon to tell you about all the good things that's happening in the town.
Yeah, I'd like to take questions at the end, but if there's a pressing question in the middle. Yeah, so if you're listening on the webinar, we will take questions at the end. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, John, for that kind introduction. And thanks to Greening USA for inviting me to be here and speak with you this afternoon. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I know to those of you in the room. And I want to express initially how fortunate I feel to be able to do this work every day. We have tremendous support and leadership at the Town of DeWitt from board members like Karen Rigney, who's here in the audience, our town supervisor, Ed Michaelenko, and all the other board members. And also I have received support to have a tremendous staff. So Chris Manchester and Stephanie Greshy, who are here in the audience, are no small part of making all these things happen. The most recent issue of Planning magazine actually talks about the importance of climate action at the local level. And that importance is heightened in our current situation with the absence of federal action. And so you are seeing communities around the country who are recognizing the need to take a leadership role. And I can tell you, indeed, we're grinding away in the trenches every day to try and make progress in the realm of sustainability in DeWitt. And sometimes it's incredibly difficult, frustrating, challenging, but we get to see the direct impact of our efforts, which is really what motivates us at the town. There we go. I also want to stress that the town of DeWitt has been focused on good planning for much longer than the 5 years that I've been there. Through the leadership of the town board or previous town boards, including board member and now town supervisor Ed Michaelenko, the former director or commissioner of development and operations Dick Robb, and longtime planning board chairman Mike Lazar, the town began a process of updating its comprehensive plan back in the late 1990s. The comprehensive plan that had been previously adopted in the 1960s. So it's been quite some time, which is not uncommon in New York State. We're not really a planning friendly state. And there are many municipalities across the state that don't have a comprehensive plan. But the town began, again, back in the late 1990s and recognized the importance of the comprehensive plan as a tool for guiding the future growth and development. And that comprehensive plan was ultimately updated and adopted in 2002. Shortly thereafter, in municipal terms, in 2008, the town completed a comprehensive rewrite of its zoning ordinance. This is something that the city of Syracuse is going through right now. So we were really a decade ahead of the city in thinking about how our zoning ordinance could influence day-to-day development patterns and decision-making within the town. In 2010, the town board, with Ed Michaelenko, one of his first years as town supervisor, unanimously adopted a 10-point sustainability policy that was intended to guide town decision-making. The policy document included a town sustainability statement that said, the town of DeWitt will provide leadership and pursue practical solutions to improve environmental sustainability in our community while reducing long-term costs. The town will adopt and support programs, policies, and actions in pursuit thereof. So that kind of set the bar of what the town wanted to accomplish. In conjunction with the adoption of the sustainability policy, the town completed a variety of retrofits, including a lighting retrofit in DeWitt Town Hall that reduced consumption by more than 24,000 kilowatt hours. They changed out all the town-owned streetlights at the time from mercury vapor lights to high-pressure sodium, which at the time had saved over $30,000 in energy costs. The town also installed a 50 kW solar photovoltaic system on the roof of DeWitt Town Hall, in conjunction with replacing the roof membrane with a reflective energy saving membrane. At the time it was installed, this was the largest municipally owned solar photovoltaic system in Onondaga County. In August of 2014, the town board adopted a sustainability plan, which I'm going to be talking some more about this afternoon. That plan, the development of that plan, was supported through what John mentioned earlier, the Central New York Climate Change Innovation Program, which I was the coordinator of. And actually, I was working in my former capacity with the Town of DeWitt on the development of this document. That particular program was the recipient of a unique grant award from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which was focused on supporting climate action at the local level. That program was called Climate Showcase Communities. And when I was thinking back about that, it really tells us how far we've fallen from where we were. It was a national program. There were municipalities from all over the country that received federal funding to implement local climate action projects. On the heels of the sustainability plan, we began outreach through a program that we called Moving DeWitt, which was focused on improving pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure within the town. And at the same time, the town began to pursue the development of a 2-megawatt solar array at the town's closed landfill, which is located adjacent to the old Erie Canal State Historic Park. So I want to emphasize, we started that process in 2014. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. Moving DeWitt morphed into many subsequent efforts that I'm also going to touch on in the next few minutes. But those efforts included elevating Erie, something called the Central DeWitt Mobility Plan, mobility study associated with Carrier Park and the Carrier Circle area. And the most current study, which is underway, is a study looking at improving transit service along the Erie Boulevard East corridor. Then in 2015, we began the process of updating the town's comprehensive plan that had been adopted in 2002. And ultimately, the town board adopted that update in 2017. And this past June, the town board adopted a new mixed-use floating overlay zone that's really a manifestation of one of the goals that was set in the sustainability policy that had been adopted back in 2010. And that policy was to include sustainable land use and transportation practices in the town zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan. So we wanted to take a step back and look at the framework that had been adopted in 2002, the resulting changes in the zoning ordinance that were implemented in 2008, and really bring that forward to 2017 and figure out, what are the things that we could put in place to help to encourage the right type of development patterns in the town moving forward. So I want to touch quickly on the tools that DeWitt has utilized to engage in sustainability planning and climate action. First, and perhaps one of the most important tools that local governments have, is the comprehensive plan. That document is designed to guide the future actions of the community, and it presents a vision for the future, provides a set of policies, goals, and actions for achieving that vision. And typically, a comprehensive plan includes a land use plan that depicts how the community sees itself growing or developing over time. And these things should work together, the comprehensive plan and the land use plan, to inform the town's zoning code and any other regulations which would be intended to foster that overarching vision. A climate action plan usually begins with conducting an emissions inventory to determine a baseline of carbon emissions in a municipality. Potential strategies are reviewed to determine which actions could have the greatest impact on reducing emissions, and then an informed decision is made to establish a reduction target, and policy goals and strategies are formulated to achieve the reduction target. Subsequent emissions inventories are conducted to measure progress, revisit targets, and to recalibrate policies, goals, and strategies. Ultimately, a climate action plan becomes part of a municipality's comprehensive plan. So you see the red dot on the screen. That's really showing those goals, policies, the strategies that are incorporated into a climate action plan can be incorporated and inform the comprehensive plan. Just as an example, when the town of DeWitt adopted its sustainability policy in 2012, there were some things that the town found were priorities at the time. One of those was streamlining the environment for the deployment of solar projects within the town. And in 2011, the town board adopted Chapter 80, which is focused on solar photovoltaic systems. And I would tell you, I'll be the first to admit that Chapter 80 is out of date now. And that's something that's on our docket to review and update, because the whole solar market and the solar industry has changed since 2011. But that was put in place as a result of the sustainability policy. This town also later became a municipality that was supporting the Solarize Central New York project, which was focused on encouraging residents and businesses, small businesses in particular, to adopt solar PV. We also worked to educate the public about the adoption of green infrastructure practices and to reduce runoff entering into our municipal wastewater system, and also to reduce flooding, which is a particular issue in the northern portion of the town. The town is also engaged in efforts, as I mentioned before, in working with the public to rethink how we get around on a daily basis, and that really started with the Moving DeWitt initiative. So to support the development of the sustainability plan, the town conducted a baseline emissions inventory, which utilized data from the year 2010. This year was chosen in order to capture some of the early retrofit successes that I had mentioned earlier, with the lighting retrofit and as well as the town solar PV project, the 50 kW solar PV project. So the town's baseline emissions in 2010 were determined to be 504,157 metric tons of CO2. The emissions inventory was broken down into both municipal operations as well as community-wide emissions. And as you can see from this graphic, the transportation sector is the most significant source of emissions. You can see that over on this side, right? 52%. And buildings and facilities, as well as streetlights and traffic signals, also play a significant source in emissions in the town at about 40%. So between those, between transportation and those other two things, it's almost all of the town of DeWitt's municipal operations emissions. At the same time, at the community-wide scale, about 50% of the community's emissions are due as well to the transportation sector. And DeWitt contains about 46% of all of the industrial acreage in Onondaga County. So you can see the numbers on the screen. If you look at industrial energy as well as commercial energy, they also play a significant role in the emissions of the town. Most people don't realize, for example, that the Syracuse Airport is in DeWitt. Malloy Road is in DeWitt. Carrier Circle is in DeWitt. Part of GM Circle is in DeWitt. So all of the industrial legacy of places like Bristol Myers Squibb, Carrier Corporation, General Motors, Chrysler Corporation, all of those, there's a lot of legacy industry that still occurs in DeWitt on a day-to-day basis that I get to see, which is exciting. But so that is also a significant portion of the town's emissions.
So just kind of clarification, did you say in the county or?
46% of all the industrial acreage in Onondaga County.
Right, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And the next closest is 12%. Yeah. Okay, so we also sought to analyze the potential for different emissions reduction strategies that the town could employ to address both issues at the municipal operations level as well as at the community-wide scale. We selected and analyzed multiple strategies at the municipal operations scale and identified that we could achieve nearly a 40% reduction by 2020 from our 2010 baseline emissions. At the municipal scale, the most significant reduction, as you can see, so this chart here, this was our baseline emissions in 2010, and here's our projected reduction, almost 40%. And this bar here represents all the different strategies that we looked at. So you can see, for example, the use of solar photovoltaic energy would play a significant role in reducing the town's baseline emissions. And then there are many other potential strategies that were looked at the time. If you pay close attention as I'm showing you these different slides, you may notice that the town's baseline emissions represent less than 1% of the total community-wide emissions of the town. But part of the theory here is one, we can lead by example, right? That's probably the most important. By leading by example, we can demonstrate that these technologies work and hopefully foster the implementation of these types of technologies across the town. So as I stated earlier, the most significant contributor to baseline emissions at the community-wide scale is transportation. And you can see here on the screen that there are multiple strategies that relate to the transportation sector, including the conversion to electric vehicles, transit-oriented development, low-carbon transportation education, and there's also a focus on energy efficiency retrofits to address the commercial and industrial sector, and to a lesser extent, the residential sector of the town. So these are all of the different strategies, again, that we looked at trying to foster. So at the community-wide scale, the most significant would be a conversion to electric vehicles. And that's because, again, that transportation sector is the largest source of emissions. Now,
What is low carbon transportation education?
yeah, it's a good question. So one thing is to put policies or programs in place at the state level to incentivize someone to purchase an electric vehicle, for example. Or we can do things like invest in pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure or improving transit infrastructure. But this idea is about educating people about the opportunities that are out there. So I'll give you one example. The community of Eugene, Oregon, for example, they found that the biggest barrier to people using public transportation was people's fear of just getting on the bus, especially if they had a bicycle. A lot of the bikes here in Onondaga County, just the same as in Eugene, have a rack on the front that you can put your bicycle on, so you can get to your kind of last mile if you have a longer commute. But people are afraid to use that. How many of you have ever used the bike rack on a bus? I have, but it's intimidating. So they had a program called Eugene Smart Trips that they had a transportation planner who would meet people at a bus stop and teach them how to use the bus, basically. And by doing so, hope to encourage additional ridership. So that's what that's about.
11,471
right.
units would be due to people's changed behavior.
Exactly. You got it. Yep. So we also took a comprehensive look at both internal and external factors that would have the potential of influencing the town's reduction in emissions over time. And these informed the overall reduction target that we set of, I think it's 25%. So there was a lot going on back when we were putting this plan together. One, typically there's an increase in emissions over time, so we had to take into account what those potential increases in emissions might be from growth and development over time, or increase in vehicle miles traveled, which is typically occurs. We tried to take into account things that the town had already done or put in place or was about to put in place before the 2020 time horizon. There was also, you may remember, the Obama administration had something called the CAFE standards to improve energy efficiency in vehicles. So we tried to take into account what those changes in the CAFE standards might do to overall emissions within the town of DeWitt, just from cars driving through, people commuting to work, that sort of thing. And you can see that there are some significant reductions associated with both of those changes to the CAFE standards. The other thing that's happening in New York is that our grid is getting cleaner and cleaner. There's less inputs from coal. In central New York, we have a large input from nuclear, but there's more use of natural gas, more solar PV, more wind. So the grid is actually getting cleaner over time. So we also tried to take that into account as we were putting this together. And then we added up the potential impact of the strategies that we had identified. And all those things add up to come to about a 25% reduction by 2020. So there are four main sections to the town's sustainability plan that focus on energy efficiency, which includes, in this case, the use of renewable energy technologies, land use, transportation, and waste. And as you can see on the screen, we analyzed multiple strategies under two broad categories with energy efficiency. One was an increase in energy efficiency and reduce emissions from buildings, which goes back to what I showed you, that the different sectors and how they contribute to overall emissions. And also to increase the use of renewable energy. So as I stated, one of the largest projects that was identified to address municipal operations was the development of a 2 megawatt solar photovoltaic array on the town landfill. And in addition to that, another strategy was to address the adoption of solar PV at the residential scale. So since that time, there have been two projects have occurred really. One is the 50 kW solar PV system that I mentioned, and also the town's participation in the Solarize Central New York program. Yeah, which that program, this will be a theme throughout the presentation. That program was really sponsored by the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board, which is my former employer, but they play a major role in the energy space in Central New York. And I don't think, I wouldn't be here literally probably without my involvement with that organization. And we've tried to continue to stay to what they do. So as a result of both of those efforts, there's an additional adoption of solar PV in the marketplace since 2010. There's over 1,300 kilowatts of solar capacity that's been developed in the town. And that represents a reduction of over 209 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. I'm excited to say as well that we've made significant progress since we started on this in 2014 with the development of the 2 megawatt system at the town's former landfill. The project should be beginning construction in May-ish, Mike. And this project will achieve an additional 431 metric tons of reductions in carbon dioxide equivalent. There's a couple images of what that system will look like. If you're familiar, this is the Erie Canal Trail here. This is the bridge that goes from Cedar Bay Park to the Erie Canal Path, and this is the location of the solar system. The circles here are actually they're areas that we need to keep clear around the methane pipes that come out of the landfill. And this is kind of a visualization of what that might look like. So the reductions from that system are equivalent to removing about 100 vehicles from the road for a year, or the carbon sequestered by over 500 acres of forest in 1 year. And this project will be highly visible. You'll be able to see it from the Erie Canal Trail as well as Cedar Bay Road. And we are working with RER, we'll be working with RER to have a public information component to this that you actually be able to get up and close and read about this project. So when we take everything together, you combine the efforts of the town with the solarized efforts and the market forces that are at play in the adoption of solar, we will have achieved about 640 metric tons of reduction from solar PV and probably more at that point by 2020. And that sounds like progress, but when you consider it as a part of the overall emissions from the commercial, industrial, and residential sectors, the reduction is still less than half of 1% of total emissions, right? So, but again, I think it's about demonstrating that the technology works and hopefully encouraging additional adoption. Another project that was identified through the sustainability plan was the conversion to LED streetlights. And we actually just recently sent a letter this morning to National Grid to participate in a streetlight conversion program. So the town has about just over 1,600 streetlights, and all of them will be converted to LED through this program. This is actually much more ambitious than was originally contemplated in our sustainability plan, because at the time we were writing the document, LED technology was not readily available and it couldn't really be deployed at the scale of National Grid. There were smaller demonstration projects around the country, but it was really not ready for large-scale deployment. But now it is, which is good for everybody. So the project will have just under a 3-year payback and will achieve about 155 additional metric tons of carbon dioxide reductions once it's implemented. And it will move very fast. Once National Grid gets started in the next 4 to 6 weeks, they'll be done in 4 to 6 weeks. So we'll see an impact very quickly. And actually we're not the first. I know there are other municipalities that have already completed their conversions. The town of Manlius is one, I believe the village of Fayetteville. I think the town of Clay as well has completed their changes. And obviously there's been the high profile focus on what the city of Syracuse is doing with their smart streetlight system. So when you combine the solar landfill project, the town with the streetlight reduction will be at about 586 metric tons in reductions, which is about a 33% reduction in municipal emissions over the 2010 baseline. And that's only 6.7 percentage points off of our goal, which was set at 39.7 by 2020. So on the municipal operations side, we're actually doing quite well, and not exactly how we thought we would get there, but the projects that we've identified and really the changes in the landscape of LED street lighting, for example, and incentive programs at the state level for solar PV have helped the town to be able to move forward. So as I said, the retrofits to commercial buildings were also identified as a significant opportunity in the plan. New York State actually adopted a new energy code in 2015, which is intended to have a significant impact on the reduction of energy consumption at both the commercial and residential scales. To date, that's really the town's primary way of addressing energy efficiency in those sectors. We don't have any specific programs to do it. There are programs at the state level, but our job at the town level is to enforce the adoption of the energy code. And our code officers are dealing with that on a daily basis as we see lots of commercial renovation, addition, new construction projects, as well as residential projects in DeWitt. We also have been trying to work with Onondaga County. Now this is a plea to all of you, and you in particular, to get the county to adopt what's called a commercial PACE program. So PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy. This was something that was started out on the West Coast. And the whole idea is that investments in energy efficiency in buildings actually help to contribute to the bottom line operation of those buildings. You're spending less money on energy and you have more money to put into the performance of that building. So the whole idea is that you can work with your local municipality to actually put those energy efficiency improvements on your tax bill. And you do it over like a 10-year period with a lower interest rate. It makes it easier to finance those kinds of projects. So to date, we had met with the legislature quite a few different times, members of the legislature. There hasn't been any action taken by the legislature at this point. There are other counties. It has to happen at the county level by the municipality that has lien authority. In Onondaga County, the county has lien authority. So they would have to put in place a program to be able to collect taxes specific to that issue. So it's something that we would like to see happen, and we think it could have a huge impact on emissions reductions in the town. But again, to date, we have not been successful. So the energy efficiency space really lends itself easily to kind of discrete projects like solar PV systems, converting LED to LED streetlights, doing energy retrofits to buildings. But when we start talking about land use, this is coming from a person with a strong planning background, the time horizon and implementation takes a lot longer and is really dependent on funding, resources, incentives, and it's really difficult to change land use patterns overnight. You can't do that. And it may be even more difficult to change behavior. In some ways, behavior is changing itself on a national basis. If you look at the decline in vehicle miles traveled, decline in vehicle ownership, the younger populations, that's actually an international trend. So there are things that probably are working in our favor, but this is a space that's very difficult to influence with any immediacy. So as part of the sustainability plan, the town adopted a sustainable landscape assessment, which was utilized to help to prioritize areas for the implementation of mixed-use development, as well as enhanced transit, alternative mobility, and the development of a greenway corridor and identifying opportunities for land conservation. The final sustainability concept map here on the screen illustrates the town's vision for the development of a mixed-use center, which is right here in the middle, this kind of dark pink color. The establishment of the north-south greenway corridor, which really follows Interstate 481, but it just so happens that coincides with the Butternut Creek corridor. We also think that there are opportunities of connecting to the Lake Creek corridor, as well as into the city of Syracuse through Meadowbrook and the Skytop and Clark Reservation. And we also looked at ways of improving alternative mobility systems. So the purple lines here illustrate areas where we identified opportunities for improved transit infrastructure, which includes connections to James Street, Thompson Road, Erie Boulevard East, and East Genesee Street. Based on the findings of the sustainability concept, the sustainability plan identified that there was infill development potential for medium and high density residential development in the commercial districts around Erie Boulevard and the Bridge Street corridors. And the town should consider ways to encourage such development through overlay zoning and other techniques that could be included in an update to the town's comprehensive plan and zoning codes. So as I mentioned earlier, upon the adoption of the sustainability plan, we got to work and started looking at making some updates to our comprehensive plan. And ultimately that comprehensive plan update was adopted in 2017. Within the update, there were changes that were specifically made to our land use plan that identified areas where mixed use development could be encouraged. And the plan further identified a goal of reviewing and updating mixed-use development guidelines to establish preferred development densities and as well as optimize allowed uses. So there's a thread of, we're trying to address this issue over time and coordinate all of our documents to get us there. So if we look at, this is that change, the updated land use plan, the area that's identified in kind of dark red, there's 3 points. This is Erie Boulevard and Bridge Street. This is East Genesee Street. This area is down by Woodchuck Hill Road and Jamesville Road. So those areas in our land use plan, we said we would like to foster those as mixed use centers over time. And then in June of this past year, our town board adopted a new mixed use floating overlay zone that will allow for the development of multi-story commercial and residential projects, primarily within that area of Erie Boulevard, Bridge Street, and East Genesee Street. The overlay outlines several different zones, so they're based on color. Red would be 2-story, a maximum of 2 stories. Blue is a maximum of 4 stories, and green is a maximum of 6 stories. So I just was reading the controversy about the project on East Genesee Street in the city, about the number of stories and density. And this was an issue that we dealt with the town board and members of the general public in DeWitt, who I would say some people had a lot of reservations about what the appropriate densities might be. But this is what ultimately was adopted.
And what are we looking at in this picture? Like where?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, this is 481 here. This is East Genesee Street. This is Erie Boulevard. And this is Towpath Road and Bridge Street. Yeah. Oh, so this area that's green, which is up to 6 stories, that's the Shopping Town Mall site. And this is another area around the intersection of Bridge Street and Towpath Road, which is actually where some of the investments in the Empire State Trail are going to happen. So that was adopted in June of 2018, and actually even before that was adopted, we had an application from a developer who was interested in utilizing the code. The project site is the site of was Mixer's Grill, and before that it was known, I knew it as Carmelo's Cafe. Some of you may remember on Bridge Street. That's a property that has been flagged for quite a long time. It's been vacant on and off for the last 20 years since it was Carmelo's. And this is a rendering of a project that's proposed at that location. So this project will have about 19,000 square feet of commercial and office space, as well as 41 apartment units on 3 stories. The 3 upper stories would be residential units. This is a major change for development patterns in DeWitt. We don't have development context like this. So we have put a framework in place that allows for this development to occur organically over time. The tool that we've used is called a floating overlay zone. So the map that the board adopted, this doesn't change the zoning outright. What it does is it makes the parcels that are within there eligible to utilize the overlay zone, and there's a process for them getting to utilize it. And we had to do that because we're a suburban town, And if we were to change the zoning dramatically, we would have made every property a non-conforming use and upset a lot of property owners, and this would never have happened. Okay? So we put a process in place that's optional, but that can encourage development over time. And we've been selling it. We've been sharing it with developers, with the local development community, making sure that we were on the right track and encouraging them to think about making an investment in the town. So this initial investment is proposed by Woodbine Group, which is Norm Swanson. And he's a very progressive-minded developer, and we're looking forward to seeing this project come to fruition. And he's planning to start construction in May. We haven't finished the site plan review process, but he may be able to reach that target. In addition to Norm's project, we've also been focused, and this is one of the areas that was identified as a place where you could utilize 6 stories. This is Bridge Street, Sealy Drive, Towpath Road, Erie Boulevard, and this ugly green water body at the southern edge, or the bottom edge of the screen, is a remnant of the Erie Canal, which I didn't realize it was even there when I started working for the town, and most people don't realize it's there, much less that it's a remnant of the Erie Canal. So the state is about to make an historic investment in the Empire State Trail, which will utilize the median of Erie Boulevard and actually connect to Towpath Road. And we are working on a master plan looking at how we might redevelop this area over time to take advantage of the state's investment in the Empire State Trail and to encourage kind of a mixed-use center for DeWitt, which we don't have, if you haven't noticed. So this is, again, that same space. This is that Wide Waters Pond, which we're thinking could be a new park in the center of DeWitt with different types of access to the water. And we're also looking at, big ideas like building new streets and other things to encourage new development near the water. We have received some interest from the development community in following this vision. That brings me to transportation. All right. So as I mentioned from the beginning, transportation is really the single largest source of emissions in the town. And the town the plan is really focused on addressing changes in land use patterns and mobility patterns through the institution of new things like mixed use development, as well as improvements to bus transit infrastructure and the expansion of opportunities for cycling and other forms of alternative mobility. And the project that I'm most excited about in all of this, no offense, Mike, is the transformation that's about to happen along Erie Boulevard East. So this is a picture of conditions out there today, which I think I would say this is our main street, and it's embarrassingly our main street. But before too long, it's going to look a lot more like this. What's that? Yeah. So. Yeah. So you may know that $200 million was committed on a statewide basis to develop what's now called the Empire State Trail. And over $20 million of that is going to be spent right here on this corridor connecting the city of Syracuse and the town of DeWitt, following Erie Boulevard and Towpath Road, and ultimately connecting over Interstate 481 with a new bike and pedestrian bridge, and then ultimately connecting to the Old Erie Canal State Historic Park. And yes, the money is there. This is 10% of the statewide total, single largest allocation of anywhere in the state. And the state's really viewing this as a signature project, even though they haven't really talked too much around these parts. But the project is supposed to start construction this spring. I'm hearing May. and they plan to be completed by the end of 2020. Very ambitious project. Ultimately, it will connect the eastern and western suburbs to downtown Syracuse through new bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and also connect things like the lakefront, the new amphitheater, the state fair, and the county's Loop the Lake trail system. And in addition, this is something important, I think, for the town of DeWitt. Erie Boulevard has no pedestrian infrastructure at all. It has kind of asphalt paving on either side of the roadway. There will be a continuous sidewalk installed on both sides of the road from Thompson Road to Bridge Street, which is not far enough. We'd like to see it go all the way to Genesee Street, but it's as far as we're going to get this time around.
Sam, I've got a question. Is
Yeah.
the sidewalk going to be protected from the snowbanks in the winter?
I'm going to talk about that in a minute, Dave. Yeah. The short answer is we're working on that. Yeah. But we have asked, we've made it a point when there's new sidewalks going in along Erie Boulevard that they're held back at least 8 feet from the edge of pavement in order to provide some space for snow storage. But outside of that, we are looking at following the city's lead. We're trying to identify a contractor that could clear, especially major routes in the town of snow in the wintertime. So that's something that will probably go out this fall to try and identify a contractor for this winter. It's a complex issue, but we're trying to address it. And really thanks to the city for their leadership in trying to figure that out. So that state investment is really connected to a much larger system that will connect Buffalo to Albany and New York City to the Canadian border. It's a big project that's happening. It's the largest, it will be the largest continuous bike and pedestrian trail system and easily in North America, probably one of the largest in the world when it's completed. So there's a few other things that we've been working on. This image that I'm showing on the screen is from the Central DeWitt Mobility Plan. This was a project that we requested through the Syracuse Metropolitan Transportation Council to get them to look at how we might make connections between the neighborhoods in the central part of DeWitt and the investments that the state's about to make in the Empire State Trail system and the Old Erie Canal State Historic Park. So this is Cedar Bay and the Old Erie Canal State Historic Park, Kinney Road, Erie Boulevard, Genesee Street, Jamesville Road, Randall and Tecumseh Roads. One of these is Waring and Peck Hill and other streets. So we asked them to start to take a look at that for us. And they finished this document in 2017. And we're starting to work at kind of picking off pieces and parts and then identifying grant resources and other resources to start to build out a bike and pedestrian network that would connect, again, the residential portions of DeWitt to this investment that's going to be happening along Erie Boulevard. This image was developed as part of the public outreach that we did for Moving DeWitt. We asked people, where do they walk? Those are the green lines. And walk or bike. And we also asked them to identify places where they have issues with walking, which are the red lines. So you can see that we have a long way to go in improving our bike and pedestrian network. So that really informed the streets that we chose as part of this study. And as part of the recommendations from that report, they provided a whole framework of decision-making tools for how you might change roadways in order to incorporate this type of infrastructure based on the width of the road and other conditions. And I mentioned this earlier, the most recent study that SMTC is doing on our behalf and also working in conjunction with Centro, DOT, and the city of Syracuse is an enhanced transit study that will look at how we could improve transit infrastructure along Erie Boulevard East in particular. This is a very early concept of looking at kind of a quarter-mile radius and where we might locate station stops. But our goal is to identify these stops, potential stop locations, and then to start to look for resources to implement those as we move forward. And lastly, I want to touch on another project that we've been doing at DeWitt Town Hall, which was a lot more involved than I ever would imagine it would be. So we received resources from the state through I always forget the name, it's not Cleaner, Greener, Climate Smart, one of those. Do you remember, Chris?
I don't know.
Clean Energy Community. All right, so the DeWitt and other municipalities I know throughout central New York have been recognized by the state as clean energy communities, and there were specific actions that we were supposed to take in order to make ourselves eligible for large grants to assist with climate action projects, again, at the local level. So it wasn't too hard for us because we had done a lot of the things that they needed you to do. So we were able to get a $100,000 grant from the state to implement electric vehicle charging stations at Town Hall, as well as to purchase 2 all-electric Chevy Bolts for the use of our planning and zoning department. And we just found out yesterday that the vehicles are coming, and then we found out this morning that they're arriving today. So, we've been waiting for 8 months, Chris? Something like that, yeah.
So were we with you cruising around doing that?
Of course, yeah. I don't have it here today. Chris reminded me this morning, well, you know, we have to get them registered and they need license plates and all that stuff. You can't just drive them out of the box. So, this is the process of installing a charging station. We needed, actually we had put in 3 2-port charging stations at Town Hall. In order to do that, we needed a 300 amp service installed, a dedicated service to that use. So this is actually our town staff dug up one of the medians in our parking lot in order to put in the infrastructure to support the charging stations. We have seen them be used already. This is actually a photograph of a woman named Sue Hopkins who works with Highland Planning out of Rochester, where they're a contractor with us working on that Wide Waters master plan that I showed you. Sue drove in from Rochester and was delighted to find that she could plug in when she got to Town Hall. Let's see, you may know, you may not know that actually in 2017, 10,000 electric vehicles were sold in New York State, which was a 67% increase over 2016. So, you know, the adoption of those types of vehicles is happening. And I think due to some incentives that are available at the state level happening at an increased rate. And so far, our stations at DeWitt Town Hall have achieved a 0.009 metric ton reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. And so every little bit helps. So as I said, the NYSERDA grant has supported the purchase of 2 all-electric Chevy Bolts. This is not an actual boat that we own, even though one of our interns put our logo on it, on the picture. We anticipate that the bolts will reduce our annual emissions by about just over 5 metric tons. And probably more important than that is people will see us driving around the town in all electric vehicles and know that, you know, it's a practical use of that technology. So when we add up all the things that I've identified in terms of specific projects affecting municipal operations, we're looking at carbon reductions totaling just over 591 metric tons. And that would represent 33.2% of emission reductions over that 2010 baseline by 2020. So we're very close, only 6.5 percentage points off of the goal that we set in the 2014 action plan. Right. There were a few other areas that we had identified through the sustainability plan. One of them was waste, and we were looking at encouraging composting. And you can see up here on the screen, it's not a very big savings, but we felt something that was important to work on and keeping organic material out of the waste stream, specifically going to the incinerator. So we have taken some steps at looking at how you would create a municipal service for composting at the town level. We did issue an RFP this past year because our waste contract was up with, I think it's Butler. And we received, I think, 2 or 3 different responses, and the cost came in so high for providing that type of service that we didn't choose to move forward with that at this point in time. We didn't think that constituents would even be interested in paying that amount for that type of service. But we are going to continue to look at that as an opportunity for the town to focus on moving forward. Last kind of category in climate action is called adaptation. And this is really saying, basically, we know that there's no amount of reduction at this point that's going to avoid some of the impacts of climate change. So we need to start thinking about the things that we can do to change our municipal operations, facilities, infrastructure, to strengthen its ability to respond to severe weather events. So one of the issues that we have in the town, especially in the northern portion of the town where Butternut Creek and Lake Creek come together, it's very flat. It was all probably a red maple swamp before it became the town of DeWitt. And we have issues there with flooding on a regular basis. And in the last 5 years since I've been at Town Hall, we've had a couple of major flooding events, especially in the Franklin Park neighborhood. But those events have also affected some of the businesses that are located in the north town. So we've been looking and identifying areas in the town where we could improve stormwater capacity for holding stormwater in the short term and then releasing that after a major storm event. And one of the other things that we have prided ourselves on is our tree program, and Chris is the primary leader for that. Over the last, actually since 2013, we've planted over 1,300 trees in the town. And we've also, the town board adopted an urban forest management plan, which has identified new sites for planting across the town. And all of the little tiny green dots that you see up here on the screen are potential planting locations. So we're continuing to try and increase the urban forest coverage in the town, which can lead to carbon sequestration over time. Chris came to me late last year and with this idea of giving away fruit trees through the town this spring. And she thought, it's a neat idea. Maybe we'll get a few people to participate. And we're giving away how many?
Almost 400.
Yeah. So almost 400 trees in a few weeks will be distributed from Town Hall. And the most exciting thing about that to me is Chris has been struggling with how to get people in the north part of the town to accept having trees on their property. They see trees as a liability, having to rake leaves or deal with fallen branches and that sort of thing. But boy, do they love fruit trees. So, sometimes it's finding a way to reach your audience and understand what motivates them and get them to adopt those things which can help you to accomplish your goals. And the last thing I want to touch on, this is something that Stephanie's been integrally involved in. In our commercial projects through our site plan review process, we have been trying to adopt practices that also will foster healthier trees in commercial projects. So this is actually an image of structural soil, which was something that was invented down at Cornell. It has been used in a few different locations already in Onondaga County, but we're starting to require the use of this in new projects in the town to ensure that trees that are planted are there for the long term and they live and grow in healthy conditions and can play a better role in carbon sequestration. So this project is actually the Marshall's Plaza right near where the new Core Life Eatery has gone in. There's several large medians in that they've redone in the parking lot, and all of those are using that structural soil material to help to support the growth and health of the trees. So with that, I just want to close by saying I've shared a lot with you. You let me speak for a bit. I appreciate that. I want to stress that the town has done a very good job at trying to obtain the goals that we set for reducing municipal emissions by 2020. We're almost on target. The harder thing to accomplish, and hopefully I've laid out for you some of the ways that we're hoping to reduce emissions at the community-wide scale, through things like changes in development patterns, fostering alternative transportation and mobility, and things like commercial PACE program to encourage retrofits at the commercial level. All those things are things that we need to work on. And those are really the challenges that for a municipality like the town of DeWitt, we can really control what we do on a daily basis. It's much more difficult to start to address this on a community-wide scale. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, Caitlin.
Has the town thought at all about how it might incorporate like speed rail or light rail into the town and connecting it to the city and other communities?
Yeah. So there was a study through SMTC called Smart One. I don't know if they may be presented here, but that study was looking at the opportunity for improving transit service across Onondaga County. Unfortunately for Central New York, our development densities are really too low to support something like light rail. The conclusions of that study were focused on supporting, especially for the cost. So the conclusions of that study were focused on something called bus rapid transit, which is something that we're trying to accomplish looking at Erie Boulevard East, because that was not included in that initial study. I would love to see light rail in DeWitt. I don't think that it's practical to think that that will happen in the next 20 years based on our development.
Okay, hang on. For our webinar participants, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. And for our people in the room, please wait for a microphone so that the webinar audience can hear your question.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could follow up on the BRT conversation a little bit, because I testified at the Senate Assembly Joint Transit hearing on the 22nd, and there actually was during that hearing quite a lot of conversation about BRT and ways to make BRT happen. And right now, I mean, the SMART study recommended BRT and had the 2 lines, but it's been put on the shelf because of Centro's concerns about operational funding. And I know coming out of the hearing, there's been some discussions about how the city of Syracuse might participate in subsidizing that to make it more feasible in terms of operating expenses. I'm wondering if DeWitt's conversations are going there. You mentioned the Erie Boulevard study, but it also could be that East Syracuse to Onondaga OCC line could easily be extended to some critical venues in DeWitt. So I'm just wondering how that conversation about BRT is going, and what do you think the prospects for future of that are?
Well, it sounds like you know more about that than I do at this point. The conversations that we've had have been with Centro and SMTC as part of this study. Centro is on board with at least the idea of having an improved transit service on Erie Boulevard, but ultimately it's going to come down to cost. And we understand that, and that's why we want to go through this exercise of identifying potential locations so that we can identify resources to put in the critical infrastructure that would be necessary to make the change. But beyond that, I think we would be interested in understanding what other potential policy approaches might be to supporting transit investments in the community. And so if there's someone that we should be talking to, let us know.
Well, one of the struggles in a conversation with Centro is that they don't seem to be able to build the concept of TOD into their projections. And so, you know, they're constantly working on existing ridership rather than projecting what future ridership could be. Oh, I'm sorry. What future ridership could be if you actually did some TOD.
Yeah.
And it seems that really has great potential for DeWitt with park and ride and those kinds of things.
So my response to that is I'm not going to sit around and wait for them. Right? So we're taking the steps that we need to position the town to be able to apply for funding that could support, let's say, enhanced transit. I think that with the type of development pattern that we're trying to foster along Erie Boulevard with the state's investment in the Empire State Trail, I think there's a great opportunity to increase transit ridership along that corridor. I understand that there are other priorities in the county through the Smart One study, but we're going to continue to pursue this idea in DeWitt.
Okay, there's a couple of questions in the chat box, and one says, slide presentation is very detailed. Will this be made available to attendees afterwards? I can answer that real quickly. Greening USA has a YouTube channel, and this has been recorded and will be placed on our YouTube channel. You can watch the whole thing again. And there was a question before that in the chat box about lighting, dark skies. Yeah. We'll get it.
Yeah.
There it is. Can you see it?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So the streetlights that are implemented as part of the streetlight retrofit will be dark sky compliant. And we, actually the town has an ordinance that that requires all lighting in the town to be dark sky compliant.
Sam, I noticed that in a number of the projects, you talked about cost savings, you know, the LED and the solar, et cetera. Do you have a sense that public opinion in the town of DeWitt is changing at all to see climate change as life-threatening? I mean, and the reason I ask that, I've never heard anyone who got a diagnosis of cancer talk about cost savings or the payback period of the drug. And yet people in Paradise, California, where the town burned to the ground, or more recently in Nebraska, where they had a once-in-a-thousand-year flood, you know, they understand what we're up against. So do you have a sense that you still have to like justify the numbers, or people are seeing this as serious?
I think, Peter, people think it's serious. I know that there are many members, that maybe some in the audience, who are members of the Sierra Club who live in DeWitt. And they have actually been meeting with us about adopting a new commitment to 100% renewable energy. So yeah, I think people think it's important. I still think it's important to show people that these types of investments, they don't just cost money, right? There are certainly savings in protecting my kids and their kids and their kids' kids into the future. But at the same time, there are cost savings that can be achieved by these types of projects. And, you know, certainly the town board's job, they have fiduciary responsibility. So, you know, they need to make intelligent decisions about how to spend town resources. So that's why I think it's important to show that, you know, not only is this going to be good for the environment, but it actually reduces the town's bottom line. When you get to projects like geothermal heating, for example, that's another thing that we have been looking at doing at DeWitt Town Hall. The numbers, those are very expensive projects. And if somebody in the audience has an idea of how to make it less expensive, let me know. And it's been cost prohibitive at this point in time.
Sam, you had one of your strategies was to limit idling of the heavy duty trucks and the smaller duty trucks.
Yep.
And you didn't address that. Can you talk about the results of that initiative?
Yeah, so we, let's see, the structure of town government, at least the town of DeWitt, the highway department, the head of highway, the highway superintendent is an elected position, right? So we can't really tell them what to do, right? Because they're independently elected and they can make decisions on their own. Fortunately, right now we have a highway superintendent who is an amazing person and open to all these kinds of ideas and has worked with his staff to reduce idling of DPW vehicles. There are some challenges with that and cold weather, but it is something that we're working at implementing. If you look at the actual potential reductions from that, it's not that large compared to other things that we could be doing, but we are doing that. There's also issues with police vehicles. Police vehicles generally are running when they're out in the field, even if the car is parked, and there are lots of different reasons for that, including the comfort of the officers, but also that they have computer equipment and other things that are running off a battery that they have to keep going. So there are some challenges to making those sorts of changes. And it's really a challenge of policing everybody. Now there's probably more equipment available, electronic equipment that could tell you if a vehicle is idling, but that costs, there are resources involved with investing in something like that. And I would argue that it was probably worth investing in some other things that would have a higher return.
Sam, I was wondering about income requirements for that might be added to the overlay zone for residential. Are there any requirements for mixed income families?
No. And I appreciate where the thought behind that. But that's something that we did not choose to address when this initial overlay was adopted. We have neither prohibited nor provided any incentive or requirement for the provision of affordable housing. But it could happen as part of a mixed-use project.
Thank you. Are there? Let's see. I got about 1:23. We've got probably about 7 minutes left. Any other questions?
Hi, Sam. I'd be very interested to know. Thank you very much for this. I think this is incredible. And one of my questions is if you could address what your peers are doing. My guess is you're way ahead of your other towns, but I'll leave that for you to say. But one of the things I know that you are ahead in that it relates to sustainability is on some standards, like the Living Building Challenge, for example. One of the 12 petals is beauty. And as far as I know, the town of DeWitt is the only place in Onondaga County where there's effective legislation preventing billboards, which I hate. There's 4 billboards right down here facing the Center of Excellence, which is a disgrace, that we allow that in the city of Syracuse. Our organization, the American Institute of Architects, I don't know, this is 15 or 20 years ago, tried to get billboards banned in the city of Syracuse. And when it went to the Common Council meeting, the billboard companies had all of their families and friends and everything else there. The room was packed. And so we lost hands down. But you folks have it's something that you should have on your sustainability list. But if you could address what the other towns are doing also.
Yeah. So I'll take that opportunity. I said at the beginning that I stand on the shoulders of others. And I know that the billboard issue was something that was very important to former Commissioner Dick Robb and Mike Lazar and the Planning Board. And they went through great lengths and some legal challenges to eliminate billboards from the town. And it does have a tremendous impact. We also have things like design guidelines that encourage, I like your word, beautiful development, as beautiful as we can make it in the town. And we have battles, don't we, Stephanie? On a daily, weekly basis with the development community about what we expect. So enough on that. as far as what other municipalities, I mean, the city of Syracuse certainly is doing a lot. But if you look at towns and villages, there's only one other town that has a professional planning staff. And that is, I always get them confused, I think it's Clay. But they're not doing anything at this level, or even close to it. You know, most of the planning decisions in Onondaga County are made, nothing against volunteers, but they're made by volunteers who do it on a part-time basis without a whole lot of support. And if we could ask for anything in Onondaga County, I think that increased focus on the importance of these daily decisions should be made. And I think in order to do that, you need professional assistance, whether it's a planner or an architect or, you know, engineers, landscape architects. You know, these are professions that are dedicated to placemaking. And I think that you can see a lack of focus on that as you drive around our community. Yeah.
I think we're just about out of time. We'll give Bob the last question, as long as he's brief.
It's dangerous. Sam, thank you here, and it is dangerous. This is the tip of, This is the tip of the iceberg. Excellent presentation. Your data and the presentation of it is outstanding in this region. You're right about the professional expertise that are needed. I'm not asking you and your team, it's the whole team, I realize that. Ed Mikalenko's leadership, his background, your background, ESF, landscape, water, analysis, place. With all the good things you're doing in your plan, it still looks like you're doing kind of everyday business with a little bit of looking forward. Not too much, and I can understand that because it's a huge task to do everyday business, land planning and so on. The biggest difficulty we have in this region is long-term patterns, beginning to plant visions for long-term patterns, which would take such things as Centro's plan for their bus rapid transit. What's the first X called? I lose track of it. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Anyhow, Centro has their bus rapid transit concept, which is an X through the center of Syracuse, going from Destiny to SU and from East Syracuse all the way to Onondaga Community College. But that's not enough. They're doing it in a limited way with a good concept because it hits a lot of people who don't have cars, a huge number of potential employees without cars and access as the primary bus rapid transit route to pick up, you know, the real service people need, which today is about use of their time, as you well know. Traffic, it's about use of time. People don't want to be in the cars that they're in for as long as they're in, even in Syracuse, where we have very short travel distances, sorry. I'm going to flip here. And what I'm saying is that your team would be best for the whole county to use as an example, not to do all the work, but to set the pattern for what county-wide, what SOCPA should be doing, Syracuse, Central New York, Syracuse, Onondaga County planning, as standards for the other towns and villages to aspire to, both in terms of hiring skills as well as the comprehensive procedure plan. You could boil down the complexity of what you're doing into a guidebook, and that should be done. I've recommended that. Because your skills are so good, the towns and villages would benefit and their futures would benefit. But from a large-scale future regional point of view, we're really falling short. We have folks from Skinny Atlas here, and we have people from Casnovia, Chittenango, and so on, constantly going through this region on our roads and through our towns and villages. They care as much about this region and the quality of it as you do about your place. So we're trying to get the long-term look into our regional planning, and we're not getting it, even with the views you're showing us. One thing you didn't mention today, and I'm trying to get around to that, is the fact that the I-81 project and its 481 and its impact on the region is large-scale regional impact towards future, building towards density that we're going to need for the long-term future to do transit-oriented development is like Shoppingtown's future will happen, Destiny's futures will happen to become Destiny centers, residential centers. So how does a long-term look at a regional approach towards transportation meet those goals and therefore to help us all plan for I-81 and 481 through DeWitt.
There's a question in there if we have the time to address it here. Maybe at a future Green Bag Lunch, a panel with the county and Sam and some other town people. I'll give you a second to take a crack at it.
What I will say is there is a new county planning director. And he unveiled his vision for planning at the county level at the County Planning Federation meeting. And I would say that his vision for the county plan that they're going to start working on now incorporates or mirrors a lot of the things that we're doing in DeWitt. So, I think that was a big step for the county to get a professional planner working at the county level. Really a full-time appointed director, which they had an interim director for a while. So I think that's an important step. I think he has the right vision, and I think he has the buy-in of the legislature, which is really critical in making decisions at that scale. And short of that, like I said, we're going to continue to do the things that we're doing. Will whatever decision made by 81 influence things in Town of DeWitt? Yes. But are we going to stop focusing on Erie Boulevard and, improving transit because of that decision, looming decision? No. Because I think ultimately they can work together regardless of what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Let's give Sam a big round of applause and thank you for being here today. And thanks all of you for being here. Just a couple of notes coming up. We will not have Green Bag Lunch in May. I think that's our plan. We're having our annual meeting May 2nd. It'll be a more look at your newsletter for the details on that. It's going to be a big tent roundtable discussion type of event. And also Party for the Planet at the zoo, April 27th to celebrate Earth Day. So I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much again for being here.